welcome to week 5 of Into the Fire, episode number 5, here live from Tulsa, Oklahoma on KGRA Digital Radio. Ronnie, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you, sir?
Doing great. It's the temperature outside this morning was like 2. So, Gil that we're going to bring on here in a little bit, he doesn't know what that's all about. It's super miserable. Brutal. Though this week's guest, we're going to have this is going to be a great one. We're not going to spend a lot of time just kind of talking, chatting like we normally do. I want to get right to this guest because we want to get as much bang for the buck from him. And he's just somebody that I consider really, you talk about one of the most tenacious detectives that I have seen as far as from my experience of seeing him on TV. And fortunately for me, I was lucky enough to meet him recently. Actually, we had a conference going on here in Tulsa, and somebody reached out to me and they said, "Hey, do you know of anybody that could come here and be a keynote speaker for the whole day during this conference?" And I told him, I said, let me think on that for about a minute or two. And immediately I thought of Gil Carillo. I thought that he would be an exceptional person to have in that capacity. And so I reached out to him. I met him. He is about as down to earth as you can get as far as a person that is as well known as he is. Definitely well known in the world of detectives. And I think that everybody's going to get a lot out of it today. I'll start out by saying, basically this is the short bio that he had sent me. And I think you're going to realize that as Gil talks today, he's a modest individual. I mean, he doesn't think that he's anybody necessarily special, but he worked incredibly hard on a fascinating case. But Gil started in the U.S. Army at age 17, and he spent 1 year of that in combat. It's hard for me to believe that he was in Vietnam, and he doesn't look old enough to be in Vietnam, but he did actually serve there. Gil holds a bachelor's degree from Cal State in Long Beach. At age 21, he was sworn in as a member of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. And while there, he spent 38 years on the department and until he retired in 2009. And during his 38 years, he worked custody, patrol, and then it says here that he started the plainclothes gang team in East Los Angeles. I'm sure that was an interesting experience that we could probably talk about that for 2 hours easy. And then most of the time on the department was spent in the Sheriff's Homicide Bureau, where he spent 21 years as actually he was an investigator for 21 years. And that is absolutely an eternity working in homicide. And not only that, but then he got promoted to lieutenant, where he spent 5 years, where he supervised 14 investigators. And during his time in homicide, Gil was called upon to be the code lead investigator with somebody that's a legend in and of himself, and that's going to be Frank Salerno. And I'm familiar a little bit with Frank just because of the Hillside Stranglers, and that's one of the reasons that I wanted to become a homicide detective. But that's for a later time. But anyway, lead to much celebrated Night Stalker serial killer case. And as a result of that case, Gil has lectured all over the United States, as well as outside the U.S. in Mexico and Panama. And most recently, he was the subject of a Netflix 4-part documentary on the Night Stalker case. And I'm here to tell you, I just watched it again this week. And if you have not seen that Night Stalker documentary, it is fantastic. It's probably one of the best ones that I've seen in reference to true crime. And then Gil also recently finished a 2 years serving as the co-host for George Lopez's podcast called OMG High. And it's super cool. We're going to start off with a quick video just to kind of refresh people about this case, and then we'll bring Gil in.
At first, Los Angeles police thought that the murder of a young woman last March was an isolated act of violence. But since then, they've come to believe it was connected to a wide-ranging series of assaults by a killer who's become known as the Night Stalker, a killer who apparently struck again during the weekend. We have a report from Nadine Berger.
Police today continue to search for any clues in the near-fatal shooting of 29-year-old William Carnes and the rape of his girlfriend. They're apparently the latest victims of the Night Stalker, thought to be responsible now for 34 brutal attacks, 14 of them fatal. These serial killings, once confined to the near Los Angeles area, are now spread over 500 miles from San Francisco to Orange County. Just as before, the assailant entered a house in a quiet middle-class neighborhood in the pre-dawn hours on Sunday through an unlocked window and attacked the couple while they slept. Neighbors are terrified.
Guy just sleep with my hand on right by my bed and a sawed-off shotgun, which I always have.
I see. Why is that?
Because if anybody comes in my house, they're not leaving.
The killer, who attacks randomly, is described as white, 25 to 30 years old, with a predominant feature of badly stained teeth. So 5,000 flyers have been distributed to Los Angeles dentists asking for help with identification. And last week, San Francisco Mayor Dianne Feinstein announced ballistic tests have definitely linked the murder of a man there to the Night Stalker. But release of that information has outraged a Los Angeles sheriff frustrated by the difficulty of tracking a random murderer.
It places this community in jeopardy because it impedes our ability to go forward fully with the investigation.
A total of $35,000 in rewards has been offered, including today a $16 donation from this group of concerned school children. Today, the search for California's Night Stalker continues, and many residents sleep with their doors and windows bolted tight, despite 100-degree temperatures. Nadine Berger, CBS.
So I'd like to welcome Gil Carillo to the show. Gil.
Yes, sir.
Legend. I know you're going to say, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. You are like you're one of the most tenacious cops I have ever seen. And the work on this case is absolutely phenomenal. And you're one of the people, one of those detectives that in my life, honestly, I like Scott Wagner from last week. Here's Gil Carillo this week. You guys are the type of detectives that are literally the people that I look up to and I want to be when I grow up, kind of guys. So welcome to the show, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you for asking me. Thank you for the invitation. It's my pleasure.
And
Gil,
thank your wife.
I was wanting to ask you that obviously there's going to be a ton of this is about the Night Stalker, and that was roughly 40 years ago at this point. He's been dead for 10 years. Why in your opinion do you think people are still talking about this and so interested in him?
Oh, I have no idea. I can only think for Gil Carillo. I can't think and answer for everybody else. Until the documentary went out, a lot of people didn't know, including people in my department. It's a fascinating case. It's a very complicated case. But what brings it about and what makes it still interesting, I don't know. In the documentary itself, there's a gentleman there for Channel 4. He was a news producer, Paul Skolnick, and I knew Paul. Paul told me, he said, when they told me they wanted to do this documentary, I told them that they were crazy. Everything's already been done on the Night Stalker. And they assured me that this approach hadn't. They did it, and it was an overwhelming success as a documentary. But what makes people fascinated, what makes people go watch horror movies? I can't answer for them.
Yeah, I think murder sells. I think it's just one of those things that people are fascinated that another human being has it somewhere inside of them that they're able to do this to another human. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Gil, how in the world did you end up getting into? I mean, what led you to Homicide to begin with?
Well, I knew I wanted to be a cop because it was a cop that saved my life. When I was 17 years old, he took me home, told my parents signed for me to get off the streets or I'd end up dead or in prison. So they did. They took his advice, and I ended up in Vietnam, and that turned my whole life around. It gave me new appreciation for life. It matured me. So all I wanted to do when I came back, I wanted to be a cop so I could give that back to somebody else. I wanted to pay it forward, as they say, even back then before that was popular. So once I became a cop, then it didn't take me long after being a street cop to see that the guys from Homicide were creme de la creme. They were the best. And it's like when they showed up at a crime scene, it's just like partying the waves. People just get out of their way. People do everything they can. And they had the power to do anything they wanted. And I can remember the first murder, I had a patrol trainee with me working. And we got the murder right out of briefing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We worked 3 to 11. Well, I got it at 3 o'clock right out of the gate. And when I came back to work the next day, the same 2 cops were there from Homicide Bureau wearing the same clothes. They hadn't been home. They hadn't done anything. They've been working all night. And they solved what I thought was going to be an unsolvable case. And that showed me that you're only limited by your own imagination and what you can do. And they did stuff. It was phenomenal. and they solved it. So I just set my goals, my dreams. When I grow up, that's what I want to do. And I was fortunate in my department. It takes a minimum of 15 years to get there. And I got there because they had started working, due to my expertise in gangs, they were starting a gang homicide unit to be part of Homicide Bureau. And so I got called up. They asked me if I was interested in going, and I screamed. I went up there. That's where I wanted to go. I was the youngest guy up there for the first 7 years, I believe, of my appointment there. And they used to call me the kid. And it was just great. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be good. There was no reason to half step. You go. I studied everything I could. I was like a sponge. I took it all in. And that's because I got sat down when I got there within the first week. I thought guys were going to dump all over me because I hadn't paid my dues, so to speak. At that time, I was coming from patrol right up to homicide detective, and you didn't do that. And I thought, oh, these guys are going to dump all over me. And one guy pulled me aside, sat me down. He said, we have a vested interest in you now, kid. You are now part of Sheriff's Homicide Bureau. You will be good. You will ask questions. You will work hard because we have a reputation and we're going to keep that reputation going. You're not going to bring it down. The minute you think you're that good and you don't ask questions, you'll be gone the next day. We'll shit all over you, gone. So it worked.
In part, when you say that, so did you feel, and when you came into that unit, did they really take you aside and take you into their wing and show you the ropes, so to speak?
Yes. You're assigned a partner, and that partner works with you everywhere you do. We're together. I'm more with him than I am with my family. Now, that partner tells the rest of the guys I'm either a good guy or a bad guy. And if I'm a good guy, then they all want to help. They all jump in. Whatever you need. Hey, call me up, do this, do that. Just ask your training officer. But they were all good to me. The greatest spot I ever worked.
So we talked, and I was fortunate enough to be able to watch the entire Night Stalker case. I mean, you laid it out, each crime that occurred, and I think, what is it, 13 murders that you guys.
We prosecuted him on 13. We filed 14. We dismissed one in the interest of justice.
Okay. And so, and you really, it was it was basically everything about each case. It was fascinating to watch. And I know that a lot of people got a lot out of it. So from there, you end up joining Homicide, and you're brand new. And, of course, you probably hadn't even earned the right to speak amongst a lot of your peers at this point. And so as you were continuing on, how did this partnership between you and Frank Salerno happen?
Well, it really happened. I got there March 23rd, 1981. I went to work straight gang murders. That's all I was doing. Gang murders. And then every Friday we had the desk duty. So you'd pick up suicides and accidentals and baby deaths. Well, Christmas of 84, we had a Christmas party, and Frank Salerno approached me and said, hey, would you be interested in becoming my partner? And I said, wow, yeah, sure. Why not? And he said, okay. He says, and we worked that out. I said, all right, let me know. So I went back and I sat down with my wife and I said, Frank Salerno just asked me to be his partner. She says, so? I said, you don't get it. That's Frank Salerno. I knew him. He was a legend up there already. And he had worked on the Hillside Strangler. And he was just the consummate homicide cop. He was good. Mm-hmm. And he was asking me. And I had, at that time when he's asking me, I got 4 years experience, and he's got a ton of them. And he's asking me, you could have anybody you wanted. And so that was it. And month of January, didn't hear anything. And then he got me on the phone. He said, meet me at one of the substations. I met him, and we met, and he says, okay. He says, hey, remember that Christmas party conversation we had? I said, yeah, I do. And he says, well, I was in my cups that night, and I said some stuff, and you remember me asking you about being your partner? I said, yeah, I remember. And I thought he was letting me down, saying, okay, I was drunk on my ass and I didn't know. But I said, yeah, I remember. And I says, I was in my cups that night too. And he says, yeah. He says, well, I'm not in my cups now. He says, I want to know, you still consider being my partner? And I said, sure. He says, good, because I already went to the captain. He's going to make it happen. And so nice. I was excited. Never knew why until the documentary. I mean, he was asked, "Why did you ask Gil Carillo to be your partner?" And his response was, he was young, he was enthusiastic, he was Hispanic, he spoke the language, and I thought we'd make a good match. And I guess we did.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. So then we go on here, and you guys are working your regular cases and so forth. Although, each one of these cases to the families, they're horrible. So we just happen to have a string of cases that you are able to link. And what's fascinating to me as I sat there and watched the documentary, honestly, is that I'm trying to visualize what it was like for you guys back then as opposed to now. I mean, I'm sitting here thinking we could probably have solved that case based on what he was doing in like 10 minutes. I mean, with the technology, I'm exaggerating, right? But like with the technology that exists today for us in the new school detectives, it's just we have so many different ways of doing it. Whereas back then, you didn't have the DNA to work with and things along that line. And I think that made it. Oh, and the other thing in the documentary that really stood out to me was the fingerprint cards. I mean, I had no idea that you guys literally did not have that automated in the 80s. I would have thought that you guys having a print, you really couldn't do much with that at the time, right? You had to
That's
have a
right.
name
The
actually
only
to go
thing that
with
was
that.
automated were felony convictions. Felony convictions were automated. Misdemeanors were not. And so we
Yeah.
finally, when we did get a name from up north, we got a last name to put with the first name. We had an informant down here. We had a first name already. Put it there. And then we told them to hand search, go through the files, hand search, looking for Richard Ramirez. And they found 8 of them. And we found the right one that had been arrested by LAPD the year prior. So that's how we found him.
How
Boy,
did that
by the
feel when
way,
you guys got that?
pardon me?
How much of a relief was that when you got that name and got that confirmation? What did you guys do first off as soon as you heard that?
Well, we just got him ID'd, but we didn't really ID him until Friday, the day before his arrest. I mean, we were hard charging it. The week before his arrest, we told the captain we had no idea who he was. We didn't even have a first name then, but we told him we'll have him in 2 weeks. We knew we'd get him within 2 weeks, and as it turns out, we got him the following week, 1 week. So, and you take luck over skill any day. Trust me.
yeah. Tell us kind of what it was like. I mean, you start getting these cases, and you're the one that basically broke this. You're the one that came to the table and said, "Hey, listen, I think that this could be a serial killer." And you're the young guy bringing this to the table, and you were received. I think on the documentary, you weren't received. I mean, they kind of were like, "Yeah, right." Tell us about what was it about this that just really kind of made you think that's what you had on your hands?
Well, it was really stuff that I learned I owe it all to a guy named Robert Morneau, Dr. Bob Morneau, retired FBI agent who was I took 2 semesters of advanced criminal investigation pertaining to sex crimes from him. And he taught me stuff that I looked and I saw that others wouldn't, and that's, as an example, he taught me that one of the things that sticks out is somebody sticks a gun in your face doesn't mean they're going to kill you. They want to see you scared. And that's foreplay. That's foreplay to sex for them. And so he did that to Maria Hernandez, my very first victim. And he didn't kill her. He shot her, but the bullet hit a key and didn't go in her head. Dale Okazaki, he had an abrasion. So he hit her in the back of the head with a gun. We're assuming it was a gun. And then he got on the other side of a kitchen counter there, and she put her hands on the top of the kitchen counter, gripping it because it was quiet. She was going to pick her head up very slowly to see where he was in the house, if he was still there. And as soon as she got her forehead up, he was right there. He just wanted to see her scared. Then he shot her in the forehead. The next, we find out there was another murder just about an hour later. We don't find out much about it until the following day. And it was just about a mile away, crow's flight, from where ours occurred. And in that one, he drug Silene Yu out of the side of a car and shot her. Why didn't he shoot her? And she was driving. He stopped in front of her. She put it in reverse, panic stop, went into a parked car and then got stuck. And he comes up. Why didn't he just kill her right there in the car? He started dragging her out and then shot her in the side. And he was doing things that just wasn't right. And you try and tell these guys, this professor early on said, how many people have gone into a house where they're taking a burglary report as a report as a patrol cop? You go in to take the burglary report from the victim and you find out somebody is defecated in someplace other than the toilet, either in the bedroom or in the living room. They've just defecated right there. And he says, and if you're looking for that hype burglar, well, then you're barking up the wrong tree. You need to look for the local sexual deviant, because that's a sign of sexual deviancy. And so I was seeing signs of sexual deviancy that other old timers couldn't see. They made fun of me. They thought I was a young punk trying to make a name for myself. Tough road to hoe, tough time. And it didn't really, I understood why they didn't believe in me, because nobody in criminal history has ever done what Richard did. And there's been no copycats to this day doing what he did. So this was a first for people to see. And people just didn't believe me. And I can understand why they didn't. I just didn't understand why they were calling me names. You know, some of them got nasty, and that bothered me. And fortunately, I had some good friends that just kept saying, don't give up. You can't quit. Go.
You just said something that, go ahead, Ronnie.
Throughout this whole process, did you guys ever, once it was over, figure out how he was picking each of his victims? Did that ever come up?
We had an informant that was burglarizing with him before he got into the murders. And they would just drive up and down the street. They drive up and down the street. It's a hot summer night, hot summer that year, and people would have their windows and drapes open, lights on the inside, so they're silhouetted and they can't see out. They go by. He loved Asians. He loved Asian victims. Asians had better booty. And I don't mean posterior in. I mean, they had better booty property.
Yeah.
And he felt that the cops really didn't give a shit about Asians, and they wouldn't work it. And so therefore, without them working them, they wouldn't care, and he'd get better booty. And Asians were, he lusted after Asians. He really liked sex with Asians.
Let me ask you this. You just touched upon that just a second ago, where what was it that made Richard Ramirez unique as far as a serial killer to the point where he has never even had a copycat since? And I already know the answer, but just for the people in the event that they hadn't seen the documentary, what made him so unique?
His inconsistency. Serial killers normally do the same thing. Pedophiles go after little girls or after little boys. Richard went after both little girls and little boys. His victims range in age, from 5 to 65. Sometimes he was used guns that he took with him. Sometimes he didn't. Like I said, he used knives, blunt force trauma, shod foot, manual and ligature strangulation. There were so many different methods. That's what made it so hard for us. That's what made it so difficult for us to find him.
And for people who haven't seen the documentary, following up on what Jason said, with all those inconsistencies, what did you guys start putting together that linked him to each of those?
Well, early on, I found a shoe print, and the shoe print we found was that of the Avia Model 440. And we got 2 investigators who were very upset because we took them off the golf course on their day off and told them to come on in and get to work. And they said, here's the shoe. Here's the shoe pattern. We want you to find it. And they said, well, this is horse crotch. Where do I start? It's to start at the Orange County line and move west. I didn't care. Just find it. Well, they did such a good job that I can sit here without equivocation today and tell you that on January 9, 1985, 1,356 pair of Model 440 Avias arrived in New York from Taiwan for distribution throughout the U.S., of which 6 pair ended up in the state of California. 1 pair ended up in LA. And so
that was black. That was black in color,
black,
right?
Yes. And so that shoe print almost became like a fingerprint. Very unique. I'm glad it wasn't a Reebok or a Nike or something. It was a brand new shoe out. And so we sent our guy from the crime lab in the physical section, we sent him to Oregon to go meet Mr. Jerry Stubblefield, who was a field and track coach up there, who owned the patent on the shoe. And he went ahead and gave us a lot of information. And that was everything. We couldn't follow Big Five Sporting Goods. They were out of Arizona, and they had different distribution ways.
Yeah, and you found out his name just briefly. You'd mentioned that at the beginning too, where how you guys had found out his name and stuff. And I know we live in a different era now. Policing was a little different back then, and I really didn't have much of a problem with how they found out what the name was. But that doesn't go on anymore. But
well, it didn't go on. It didn't go on in L.A. at all anymore. That was a surprise to us when I saw it on the DVD. I couldn't believe that he was saying that.
Yeah, I was a little surprised.
And their methods, I'm happy to say it didn't happen in my time while I was up there.
Right.
That was unheard of. And he ended up, Armando gave us the last name, but unfortunately, because we had so much going in with everything but the last name, and that's what we got out of San Francisco was the last name. Anything that we would have gotten as a result, if that had come out in trial,
yeah,
we didn't know about it, but if that had come out in trial, that's fruits of the poison tree. So everything after that would have been tainted and would have been inadmissible. But we didn't get any information other than it gave us it allowed us to find, we already had the fingerprint. It gave us a name to find the fingerprint. So a judge would have had to listen to a little side hearing whether we had enough information to get that or not.
And before the last name, there was issue. His teeth has been a huge thing in that documentary that everyone who's watched it has heard about. What can you tell us about the stuff with the teeth and the dentist that you guys had even before the San Francisco stuff came in?
Well, we knew he was going to a dentist because he tried one day to kidnap some kids, and they called the cops, and a motor cop, Officer Starvos, saw him, and he was a motor cop. So motor cops, they're interested in writing ducats. And so he saw him run a red light, and he went over a whoop-de-whoop, and over a little hill, so he got out of his sight just for a few seconds. But then he pulled him over, he got out, and he patted him down, put him on his hands on the hood of his own vehicle, the stolen vehicle he was driving that day. And Starvos went back to his motor. Well, Richard could hear off the speaker on a motorcycle, attention all cars, be on the lookout. This guy just tried to do this color car. Richard could hear that. And Richard drew a pentagram with his finger on the hood of the car. It was a brutally hot day. And he did that. And then he took off running. And Officer Starvos didn't catch him. So he got away. And in that car, we found a little cheap plastic business card holder. And actually, it had a business card from the dentist he was going to. And it was an appointment card. So we went down there, talked to the dentist. And we ended up putting 2 officers undercover inside the dental office itself, where they were working. They were making money. They were working 7 days a week, 12 hours a day. So they're not complaining. They liked it. An executive from my department decided that that couldn't be. It was a waste of money because that was actually in the city of Los Angeles, and in the city of Los Angeles, they also had robbery alarm systems. So they had, he told us, get LAPD to go in there and put an alarm in there, a silent alarm, pull our guys out of it. This guy's not coming back, and it's a waste of money. So we said, okay, we did what he said. He did that. And once we pulled him out, Richard went back the day after we pulled him out. And that night I got a phone call about 9 o'clock at night from the dentist, who was really tough to understand anyway, because there was a communication problem because his primary language was Chinese. And he told us Richard had been there. He kept pushing the alarm. Nobody ever came. Well, it was a malfunctioning alarm. Nobody's fault. It was just a malfunction alarm. So, wisdom of the good executives will put our guys back in there now. So,
Yeah.
so
But he never showed back up for a follow-up at the
he
dentist.
never showed back up for a follow-up.
Yeah. And then so you continue on here, and this murder spree, or this series of murders, that spanned over how long? What's the total time that we're talking about here?
First one was March 17th of 85. He was arrested August 31st of 85. So we're talking maybe 6 months.
Yeah, 6 months. That's a massive. I mean, that's a motherload of murders in a short amount of time. That's what I'm thinking.
Oh,
you know what I
it
mean?
is.
Yeah.
It is.
So
we weren't sleeping. We were working 7 days a week.
and out of this series of just a variety of cases, because there's a lot of people that there's several victims that didn't die, and thankfully that 6-year-old didn't. She's a superhero. I mean, I know you're close with her still to this day,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. So
Right.
so yeah, she's amazing. And so was there a reason why some of these victims he would let live?
Richard said that if you acquiesced to his commands, you lived. If you didn't, you died. So simply stated, he wanted you to shut up. You better be quiet, do what he said. Don't put up a struggle, because if you did, you died.
And as far as evidence now, are they still? I mean, I'm sure that we talked about this before. Of the 13 that he got tried for, how many more is he probably good for, or at least suspected in?
Okay, we knew he was positively. We filed one that was dismissed in the interest of justice, and that's because that was the only case that we didn't have some kind of physical evidence that linked to the remaining 13. The defense team said, aha, here's what we'll do. We'll go on that one first, and then we'll do the others. That way, if we beat this one, we can show that they were wrong on at least one, and maybe be wrong on the others. And so they wanted that case severed. So we'll do that one, and then we'll do the remaining 13. The judge warned them, okay, we'll do that. And he told us the day before he gave his decision, I'm leaning towards honoring their request, told the prosecutor. So be prepared to respond tomorrow when we come into court. So we went into court the next day, and he says, Mr. Halpin, who was the prosecutor, said, Mr. Halpin, I've had their request before me asking for a severance. And at this time, I'll hear what the prosecutor has to say. And he says, Your Honor, he says, prosecutor is willing to dismiss in the interest of justice, because you said that as soon as we better dismiss this one, as soon as we're done with this one, they better be prepared to move forward on the remaining 13. Mm-hmm. So in the interest of justice, we'll dismiss that particular case, and we're ready to proceed on the remaining 13 right now. And the two attorneys representing Richard, they about dropped it in their drawers. They didn't know what to do. They started stuttering. And he says, well, counsel, we ready to proceed? He said, well, no, we thought we were going to start. He says, no, I told you to be prepared. Be back at 1 o'clock. That was it. I think we started at 9 o'clock, 9:30 in the morning. He says, be back at 1:30 today, where we'll start taking witnesses. And that's the way the trial started. That's why we dismissed that one. We looked at about 8 other cases. We didn't go into them with a fine-tooth comb. We started going over them. And circumstantially, some of them were better than others. But again, we didn't want anything that wasn't a dead bang case, because we didn't want them to beat us on any of them. So we didn't file any of them. In talking to Richard, Richard said, I'm good for 4 more. So, okay. And he says, but I'm not willing to talk to you about those right now. He says, give me about 7 years up in the joint. He says, and I'll be ready. And then I'll talk to you about the 4 that you don't know about.
Do those that you just talked about, does or does not include the San Francisco ones?
No, that doesn't include San Francisco.
And do you know how many they had him linked to up there?
They had him linked to 2. They filed one. The other one, I don't know why they didn't file. And then the third one didn't come until 2010. They made him on DNA, which we didn't have in '85, but they made him on DNA on an old case. That was a 10-year-old little girl.
Oh,
And
wow.
not that I'm happy about anybody that loses their life, but for all the naysayers that said that I was full of hot air because he wouldn't be doing pedophile stuff. This was just in their face. Now you got physical evidence. And that was long before the documentary came out, where we put the 6-year-old on that is now like 42, 43 years old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you guys end up getting to a point where you arrest him, and then you and Frank go in there to talk to him, and just for those that didn't watch the documentary, kind of talk about what that first interaction was like with Richard, as
Sure.
far as because he was a fan of Frank's.
Yes,
Apparently.
he was. Richard was well-read. He self-taught. In his own words, he told me at one time, he says, "Hey, Gil, I got an ego that will fill this room. And I can tell you all about serial killers from the time the Romans fed the Christians to the lions." He says, "I know it all." And he knew all about Mr. Salerno, because Mr. Salerno had worked on the Hillside Strangler, and he knew all about the Hillside Strangler. He called me Gil, and he called Frank Mr. Salerno. And one day I asked him, "Why you call him Mr. Salerno? You just call me Gil." He said, "That's Mr. Salerno." I said, "What do you think? He was 7 foot tall, hovered, and put his pants on both legs at the same time?" I said, "Rich, he's no different than you and I. One leg at a time. We eat, we shit." And he's, "No, that's Mr. Salerno." And then he was so excited. We put him. He used the same cell that we had stuck that Angelo Bono used to use, who was one of the Hillside Stranglers. And he was excited over the fact that he was staying where Angelo Bono resided.
Yeah.
How openly did he talk about everything that he did, if he did at all, I guess?
He didn't talk about when we first started talking, as open as he'd get, he'd talk in the third person. He never would admit to doing anything. He didn't do anything. Richard didn't do anything. The Night Stalker may have done this. Night Stalker may have done that, may have gone this way, may have gone that way. After the case was adjudicated, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. We spent probably 4 or 5 days with him after. Every day we'd go down and visit him. And there was a made-for-TV movie that we took down there and watched it with him. He was in trouble. They weren't going to let him watch it. And I said, "No, we want to watch it." So we put him in there, and then we talked more openly about stuff. He still didn't want to cop out to the kids. And we asked him how many houses had he been to more than once. And he talked about the Zazara house that he had been there. And that's where it was a double, where he cut the lady's eyes out. And
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Did he ever talk about what he ended up doing with the eyes?
No,
Or why he cut him out?
Anytime he had information that we didn't, his ego wouldn't allow him to talk to us about it at all. But we never did recover him, but we're keeping an eye out for him.
Yeah,
Along the lines of
homicide
that-
humor.
The once he was in prison, were there other inmates reaching out to you guys all the time of, "Hey, he told us this," or "He told us that"? Did you guys get any luck with anything like that?
No, he was pretty isolated. They wouldn't let inmates get around him. I was told there was a good fight between him and Peterson, the guy that killed his wife.
Really? Scott Peterson?
Yeah,
Scott Peterson.
And the other inmates, I know nothing about San Quentin, how they do their visitation rights or what they do. But I heard a lot of the inmates hated him up there, and he was on death row. But they hated him because sometimes visitors would come by, and he'd intentionally be playing with himself, waving to the visitors.
Mm-hmm.
So the other inmates didn't like him. He didn't like where he was at all. I saw an interview once or listened to a tape where he thought it was inhumane, without thinking about how inhumane what he did. He didn't like being isolated like that. I once talked to a warden from up there, and he said it usually takes them about 7-8 years before they start going nuts. So I don't know. I know I didn't. I've been to other prisons in California. I didn't like San Quentin. San Quentin notified you right away. "Hey, we have a no hostage policy here. So you hear the sirens or you hear anything, hit the ground or get your back up against a wall, because they won't negotiate for you."
Huh.
And
So you guys, his family got him an attorney. And you briefly talked about them a second ago. Did you ever have a chance to talk to his parents or any of his relatives? Did they give you any indication of, oh my gosh, we can't believe this, or there's no way it was him?
I introduced myself to his mother and his sister, and I told his mother, sorry that you have to be here for this. I'm sorry it's your son. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them, but I suggest you go through your attorney first because I don't want him to be upset. And I'll never ask you or your family members anything about Richard. I know you still love him. And I never did.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a fascinating case, and I think between you and Scott Wagner from last week, and he was NYPD homicide in North Manhattan, Manhattan North, their squad, and the thing that really stands out to me about the both of you, that's really kind of a common denominator, is the fact that you guys are exceptionally good at just communicating with people, and you're both nice guys, and I think that. I mean, no, seriously. I mean,
I thought you
you're
were
just
both good looking.
well, that too. Of course, that helps. I have to live with that problem too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
But anyway, so I mean, I think that's one of the things. So as far as you guys, how long was this trial anyway? How long did it go?
Probably about 6 months. We started. God, I really can't remember. I think we started around April of '89, and we finished in September, and then they came down with the sentencing in November.
During that trial on that documentary, that just reminded me of what was the deal with him wearing the sunglasses in the court, and why did the judge let him do that? Do you have any info on that?
Yeah, but it was much easier to let him wear them than it was to have to kick his ass to take them off. That's what it would have been a fight, and there was nothing wrong with them, and it worked out to our advantage, letting him wear them because other people identified him like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. So with respect to the case too, the thing that people, it's really, we talked about this a little bit, and I think it's interesting for people to know, is that in LA County, these smaller jurisdictions that are located within the county, they have to actually reach out to you guys to take the case over. And that's similar to what we do here in Oklahoma, where we smaller you're not going to have that from Tulsa or Oklahoma City here, but like in several for us, I guess theoretically we could reach out to Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation. That's who we would reach out to, and they would think we were probably nuts because we work more murders than they do probably. So what was that like dealing with a lot of these smaller? Because I mean, I know in the documentary you talk about how you went to one of the jurisdictions and they weren't really happy to see you at that location.
The city of Monterey Park and the city of Glendale, they were concerned. There are a lot of small cities, and they call up and ask for help. They either call and ask for help, or they just contract through the county for all homicide work for their jurisdiction. So there is no problem. The problem became with Monterey Park, even more so, was they had a chief of police that didn't want Big Brother coming into his city and skulking around, I guess. He was very adamant about they wanted to make the arrest on Richard Ramirez. They wanted to capture him. So they weren't friendly with anybody, with me and anybody else from my department. We eventually found one guy who was a good friend of ours, worked Homicide Bureau. He had been a reserve cop before he became a regular for the sheriff's department, and he was a reserve with Monterey Park, and he still had friends over there. So we used him as a liaison, but it didn't work. It really, they just didn't want to give up the ghost. They didn't like me, and they didn't like what we were doing. And Glendale, their lead investigator, realized, and he didn't realize. They told him the night of the murder when they were investigating, do you think we ought to call sheriff's department? This may be part of what they're working on. And he said, definitely not. This ain't what they're working on. And so he didn't. And it was somebody from the coroner's office who goes to every agency in LA County when there's a death. He's the one that called me and said, Gil, you ought to look into this case. I'm telling you, it looks similar. So we went out there, and he said, man, I'm so sorry. Frank had run into problems with Glendale during the Hillside Strangler. And they assured Frank and myself, hey, it's not going to be like it was in the Hillside Strangler. We're going to be open with everything, and you'll get it all. And we said, okay, well, we'll all work together. You continue working your cases and we'll do what we got to do. When somebody comes up with a suspect, we'll all get together. And logistically, we had a lot more manpower and we could do a lot more work. And so he called up one day and he says, hey, I'd like a surveillance team out here. I said, okay, what do you got? He said, well, I got this guy. I think he's good for it. I said, okay, what makes you think he's good for you? You got some kind of lead? You got evidence? No, I just got this gut feeling. I think he's good. I said, well, you got to give us something more than just this is your favorite guy to justify giving you a surveillance team to follow him 24 hours when we got nothing.
Yeah.
And he got pissed off, so he took all his marbles and didn't bother us again. And when it came time, when we made the case without his assistance, when it came to file, he didn't want to give up any of his reports, anything, and help it just said, let him. So he hand carried everything over there, including the videotapes that he said he had never heard of us, and there it was. You know, it wasn't real good.
How about with LAPD? Was there similar issues, or did you guys get along well with them?
No, we sat down with LAPD has different operation. We have one centralized homicide bureau within the county, and we go wherever the murder occurs. And LAPD has homicide investigators at every station, every one of their stations. They have one unit downtown that's called Robbery Homicide Detail or Division, and those guys are the big boys from Dover. So when you get an O.J. Simpson case, Foothill Division homicide cops would handle it, and then all of a sudden, oh, it's O.J. Simpson. So the call goes down to downtown. RHD now comes in and takes it over. We have one homicide bureau. We don't do that. So we got with the two guys that were running it from LAPD, and we said, here's the deal. We don't give a rat's booty who gets the arrest. We don't care where it is. All we got to do is we got to make a pact right now. We meet and we exchange information on a daily basis. And that's what we did. And it meant sometimes meeting at distributors of spiritus fermenti, and we'd get over there and exchange notes. And sometimes it meant just over the phone or in the office, but we did exchange. They were very, very good about it. That was Paul Tippin and Leroy Orozco. Great guys for LAPD.
I can't imagine you had, obviously this was the biggest case of your career, I would guess. How about after this? How was the rest of your, because you were in homicide a motherload of time after that. How did this case affect you positively or negatively doing any other just quote unquote normal murder?
It built confidence within myself because I stuck to my guns. And I remember the operations lieutenant in the bureau one day saying, okay, Gil, when they finally made some guns on different cases that people thought were not related to mine, and I'm saying they are. And we were in a private meeting. He just said, okay, Gil, it's your turn to go out in that squad room and jump up on a desk and start jumping out and go, nan, because you're the only one that's been right from the beginning all the way through. I said, we ain't got time for that shit. We got work to do. And we just continued plugging along. So it didn't bother me that much. And when it was over with, everybody had more confidence in me. One of the first cases I got, I remember we got it on a Friday afternoon. I had a brand new homicide cop with me, Art Franson, and it was a double homicide at the Chinese Church for Christ, the city of Rosemead. And we went out there, we worked it, and had the guy in custody on Sunday. And on Monday, I got him to go back out there with me, and he did a video walkthrough for me, show me how he did it. And when I came back in Monday into the office, one of the guys said, hey, Gil, he says, congratulations, man. I didn't realize you could do that stuff. I thought Frank was carrying you. You know, so they thought Frank was doing everything and I was doing nothing. And, you know, sometimes it works. So more confidence was built up in me. I had more confidence in myself to go ahead and stand up for what I thought was right, because I was standing up against everybody, including Frank, when Frank didn't believe in the beginning that there was a serial killer.
Yeah, and one of the things that really jumped out to me too in the documentary, just learning about it, was the media relations. I really, honestly, I was kind of sick to my stomach with the fact that you were having that constant battle with the media about keeping stuff quiet. And I'm a huge proponent of not telling the media, really not, only the absolute necessary is the camp that I'm in. And I've seen that where you get people that want to leak stuff out, and we don't experience that really here in Tulsa specifically. We've got a really good relationship. So do you get along with them, or did you get along with them?
Yes.
Is it just?
Yes, for the most part. After this case, Laurel Erickson, who was the one, she was in the documentary, and at one time, I wanted to hook her up. I wanted to hook her up for extortion.
Yeah, so did I.
We were told we couldn't leave the building because she had information on the shoe print. She was going to leak it if we didn't give her a stand up. The captain made us stay inside the office till she was ready outside. We went out to the parking lot, and once we went out to the parking lot, she met us and said, "Hey guys," and so Frank gave her a little comment, and then we kept going. And I was so angry, I wanted to go ahead and hook her up for extortion. As it turns out, in the long run, you get to know Laurel, and we became friends. And she's just good at what she does. She was an attractive lady. She knew how to either she could play the dumb blonde, the attractive lady, blow smoke, build up your ego, be anything, and all she wants is a story. And I talked to her producer and Paul Skolnick, and he says, she was never going to give that information up. And I said, I would hope not, but it just pissed me off. At that time, short fuse, don't play with me like that. You give it all.
Yeah.
I'd have hooked her in a heartbeat if they'd allowed us. And as it turns out, we ended up being friends.
Hey, Amanda, would you throw up Gil's? There you go. You could follow Gil on Instagram, and actually he loves it when you follow him on there. So he'll actually probably interact with you from time to time. So he puts a lot of cool stuff up there. I follow him, so I suggest you do the same. And I want to mention this too. Gil teaches throughout the country. If you happen to be watching this and you're like, man, he might be perfect for us, then reach out to him on his Instagram like I did. And who knows, he may be speaking at your conference down the line. And I think that would be fantastic. I knew that this thing would fly by and we would zip through this thing in no time. I mean, there's so much, honestly, that I'd like to just, man, we're going to have a drink sometime down the line, Gil. I don't know if I've got to go to LA to make it happen, but it'll probably happen, and I'll probably get you drunk, but I'm going to learn a lot.
I find that hard. My wife was around. I was going to make fun of her. We just had this anniversary, and we had a big party, and we come down the house and got 13 bottles of wine. And I just looked at my wife. I said, "Man, you got a drinking problem." She doesn't drink.
Yeah, right. Listen, we're about ready to cut out on this thing. If you, like I said, reach out to Gil, follow him on Instagram. If you're looking for a speaker in reference to, of course, I'm sure he's got audiences that you probably speak to almost anybody, probably.
Yeah,
but
put 3 transients in front of me. I don't care who it is.
And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about him is that he when he came to us, he said that he really didn't have any limits on this. We could ask him anything. So, Gil, I can't thank you enough. I want you to thank Mrs. Carillo for allowing us to borrow you for a little bit of time tonight also. And you guys have been married for how long now?
53 years.
Yeah, congratulations on that. That's amazing.
Thank
I
you.
want to thank you seriously. Ronnie and I know Ronnie's been super stoked about this. I am as well. We have literally got to run, but our next week's guest is going to be Jody Ewing with the Iowa Cold Case site, and she's going to be super too. Thanks everybody for joining us. Hopefully you'll catch us next week. Tell your friends and family to tune in, and we'll catch you the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
See you next.